Grow your own way using Awin's affiliate marketing platform. It's not every week that we get to talk to a founder who has been building companies for the past 22 years. Today's guest was a co-founder of LinkedIn and has been working to safely connect people online ever since.
You're listening to Found, TechCrunch's podcast that brings you the stories behind the startups. And today we're talking to Eric Lee, the co-founder and CEO of KarmaCheck, a startup that is making the background check process quicker and more transparent. I'm Becca Skutak, and here to talk about our digital identities is my fabulous co-host,
Dominic Midori Davis. And of course, before we get into our conversation with Eric, we have our two truths and a lie. At the end, we'll tell you which one of these statements isn't true. So listen carefully. Is it that KarmaCheck could one day be used to authenticate news sources? That Eric saw the potential of the internet as he was working on the early web browsers? Or a quick background check gives employers a competitive edge?
Well, you'll have to keep listening to find out. But before we give you our conversation with Eric, just a quick reminder to rate and review the show. You could do so wherever you're already listening to this episode. It's very helpful for us and very easy for you, so sounds like a win-win to me. Without further ado, here's our conversation with Eric. Hey, Eric, how's it going?
It's going well, Becca.
Eric, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about KarmaCheck?
Sure. So KarmaCheck is a relatively new background check company. We help employers of many kinds to help run background checks on candidates that they are about to hire. That's basically what we do.
And I know this is obviously not your first company, and you've worked at numerous different companies as a founder or a co-founder over the last couple of decades, but why background checks? Like, what got you interested in this space?
Well, KarmaCheck is meant to do a lot of things, or even maybe more things than background checks. But we thought we started this very interesting point with background checks as the foundation for more that we plan to do in the future. KarmaCheck really got its start from LinkedIn, where I was one of the co-founders, and is really, in a way, a continuation of that. A few years ago, I was just really interested in creating greater trust on the internet, online, and I wanted to really help make kind of digital identities more robust, because more and more of us, whether it's in a hiring scenario or when we're interacting with each other online, have come to rely on things like profiles and online resumes that much more. And so we felt it was just important to put the blue check mark next to those profiles and let people know that the information that are contained in those online identities, to know that that's true and that information is verified. And so that's how KarmaCheck came to be, and how we ultimately got into background checks, because background checks, the industry is really in the business of verifying those identities for candidates before they get a job.
And with what you just said about it almost being like a jumping off point, what do you add on? How do you guys make this more focused on that digital identity piece of it? And how do you keep expanding from this?
So we do a couple of things that are different than traditional background check companies. The first thing is really kind of obvious for this day and age. So it turns out that background checks, the way that they're done, involves a lot of manual processes behind the scenes. Even though a background check company might put up a dashboard for its customers to help track where all the background checks are. But behind the scenes, there are people running around. They are even calling and visiting courthouses to look up if a candidate has certain criminal records and so forth. And what KarmaCheck has been doing over the last 5 years or so has been really eliminating all of those manual steps, or trying to eliminate as many of them as possible, and automating those steps, whether using traditional automation or even more recently, AI, to help, again, bring automation to that. And as a result of that, to make background checks, which has traditionally been a slow part of onboarding a candidate and turning them into employees, to make that go a lot faster. And so speed is definitely very important. Speed is really the currency for how effective either staffing companies or companies that hire people. It's really important for them to be able to hire quickly. And then the other thing that we do is we have this concept called data reuse, which is the idea that once a part of someone's background has been verified, that shouldn't have to happen again. And that's another thing that happens today with background check companies, that they run the same types of checks, over someone's background and their history over and over again. Usually there's a background check that goes back about 7 years for any particular candidate. So there is a lot of duplication in that effort. So not only does it take more time, it also costs employers more to do that. And so with this idea around data reuse, we hope to make that a thing of the past.
I wanted to ask you more about what background checks were like in the past. I can't really visualize it. Was it always like a process? How did people do background checks back in the day? Because I imagine if you wanted to check on someone, like how did you compile all of that data on a person? I'm trying to think of like what things were like in the early 2000s. And like, what did you do when you wanted to check on somebody? Like, how did that work back then?
Well, background checks have been around for a long time. And so businesses almost pretty ubiquitously actually use them to hire. And you find them in a lot of regulated industries like healthcare, but you also, find background checks being run in manufacturing and industrial segments, and they get used a lot. And the way that it used to be done, it was pretty manual because they've been around for a long time. So candidates would have to fill out forms on their PCs, listing their prior education or employment histories. They would provide information such as their addresses, so the criminal databases around where they lived could be consulted, that sort of thing. And so it was just a very manual process. And so fast forward to 2024 here, and unfortunately, a lot of those processes are still the same. And so you find candidates often complaining they have this beautiful experience when they talk to recruiters at the company, and then they want to get hired by this company. And then here comes the background check process that is still relying on this really outdated candidate experience that takes a long time and really suffers from a lack of transparency. And so candidates are often left wondering, they're excited to work for a company, and then they have to go through this process of a background check that might take a week or more. And during that time, it's like a black box where they don't know what's happening. And yet it seems like these nefarious things are happening behind the scenes of some evil company probably looking for something wrong in their background to disqualify them or something. And so that's been the experience. What we're trying to do is to really renew that experience and make it actually not a painful experience, something that still has to get done, especially in regulated industries, but is much more pleasant experience for the candidate and also much faster in this day and age where talent is really in great demand and there's actually a shortage of workers in many different industries. And so we want to start with background checks, but we want to evolve that to dealing with other use cases that go beyond employment. And often much the same information is consulted in those other situations as well. So for example, if someone is renting an apartment, for example, they have to go through a background check as well, which often goes into looking at their current employer, how much money they're currently making, if they're able to pay the rent, if they, have any maybe crimes that they hopefully, have never committed, credit scores. So a lot of that information that goes into, let's say, a background check for a potential tenant is also checked in an employment scenario. And so that's how we're going to extend into the future by working on what we do right now and extend it from there.
You're so right. I don't think I've had an instance where I've had a background check performed on me in a while, but the second you said people are waiting around, like curious what they're finding out, it did remind me. I do remember being like, oh, they're going to find that criminal thing that I actually literally never did. I have literally nothing on my record. But I was like, well, they're taking so long to get back to me. Like, why? Yeah, I think the last one I did was for an apartment when I moved to New York. I want to say, I think it was a while ago, like at least 7 years ago, but that's so interesting to think about. And I'm curious with especially like the automating piece of it, and because it was truly like a week-long plus process, what was it like actually making it more automated and actually taking that idea of, oh, let's make background checks easier, let's make them more transparent? Like, what was it like for you guys to actually build that company up and be able to get that shortened time frame?
Well, we really have done a lot behind the scenes to take this process that not a lot of people understand, admittedly. There is a lot of complexity behind the scenes, and we kind of take care of all that complicated, messy work. What KarmaCheck does is interface with thousands of databases as they exist all around the country, even around the world, because we handle international checks as well. We take the drudgery out of having to interface with all of those different sources of information that are needed to bring let's say, a background check report together. And instead of having people go and literally type in a candidate's name into some state database, for example, or some federal level database, we have bots that do that. And we've created lots and lots of different bots and variations of those bots to, again, automate that process, do it much faster, do it much more consistently, so that, as you were mentioning, Becca, that mistakes and inconsistencies don't happen. And so we don't want for a human to misinterpret a result that they maybe found from a county office. We have machines processing that instantaneously and consistently. So those are some of the things that we've done. So as a result, we can handle a lot of scale that happens and just do it way more automated in a consistent way.
And I'm always curious with stuff like this because I totally get why I would want to go through a job application process or an apartment rental process with someone who used this. It seems like there's so much benefit to the consumer. You get this transparency. It's not as long. But what is the demand like from companies looking to use this in their hiring practice? I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't be this pessimistic, but I'm always like, wow, companies don't care. Like, they don't care if the process is better. Like, what is the demand like for this? I'm assuming I'm wrong.
Well, first of all, one of the things that we hope to enable for you and others is that we hope that we get to the day where if you've moved to a new city, for example, and you've moved there for a new job, that you only have to do one background check. That same background check that your new employer asked you to do is the same one that you could then turn around and use to apply for the new apartment because that you've moved to a new city. And so today, you would have to do two of those, but who wants to go through this rather laborious process? And so we want to just make it possible so that you could just do one of those. And for future jobs, you can rely on the one that you already did. So that's a vision that we have. But what's interesting is that in the current market, there really is a shortage of talent. And so that means that there are multiple employers that are competing for the same person to go work for them. And that's true in a lot of different industries that we work with. And we do a lot of work in healthcare, and so it's particularly acute there because of the recent pandemic that created a shortage of workers. And so the ability for the employer to move that candidate really quickly through a process, including a background check, is just a big competitive advantage of us to them, actually. And so we have customers who literally want to hire a person on the same day. So these are delivery folks, these are warehouse people. They can get lots of different jobs, whether it's, let's say, delivering groceries or delivering food. They could also be delivering packages. They could be working in a warehouse. And so they've got many opportunities. And so to be able to interview someone, get them through a background check so that they can be properly credentialed to work on the same day, maybe to go through training before they actually get to work, is a huge competitive advantage. And so there's a lot of companies out there that want to have this speed, want to have background checks really occur instantaneously. And those are the things that we deliver out there for our customers.
I know you were talking about using one background check for like the apartment and also in job. So what does the company do if something does technically change in someone's life between, getting an apartment and getting a job? Like what happens if they do get arrested or something like that? How does that fit into the vision of having like one background check for all of these things?
Yeah. So that's where the aspiration is, to keep it as simple as that so that all individuals can just kind of go through this process once. It's like having a vaccination and being able to, show the documentation that you've done it and not have to do it again. But in the real world, there are certainly some subtleties involved with actually how to make that happen, especially people are living their lives in a certain place in real time. And so things about them change. And that's what the technology that we have developed manages, is it stays on top of that. And so we never want to sacrifice the accuracy of the information that we provide to employers in the name of speed. And so that's what our technology is designed to do, is to figure out, hey, what things can be reused versus what things do need to be updated again, such that we can still give the most accurate information, let's say, to an employer or a landlord or some kind of other institution. That's what we try to do.
More from this conversation right after a quick break.
AWIN is an affiliate marketing platform that helps connect e-commerce brands called advertisers and online trusted authorities called publishers connect and create winning partnerships that deliver huge commercial benefits that are a win-win for all. AWIN's advertisers see an average ROI of $13 for every $1 they invest in their programs. And they see those returns while achieving a variety of marketing goals, like acquiring new customers, increasing their AOVs, boosting retention, growing brand awareness, and the list goes on. So what are you waiting for? Don't wait. Start your affiliate marketing journey today at awin.com.
And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk to you a little bit about your background prior to KarmaCheck. Obviously, you've been in the Silicon Valley space for quite a while, and you have worked at a bunch of companies that you've either founded or have worked at that we all know by name, LinkedIn obviously being a big one. And so I'm definitely curious, what has it been like founding? This is what, your fourth or fifth company that you founded? Or were co-founder? Yeah, like that's crazy.
Yeah, that's right.
What has kept you wanting to be an entrepreneur, and what has kept you like hungry to take that next idea and turn it into a company? I can't imagine ever starting a company, and we talk to people who do it all the time. What has it been like for you being on this entrepreneurship journey and now being at the stage in your career that you're at?
Well, first I would say that starting companies, being an entrepreneur, it really is something addictive. So when you get into it, it really is quite a rush. When I worked on LinkedIn many years ago, it was a really great time because it was one of at the beginning, early days of the internet. And if you could imagine, there was a time actually before people had identities online. You could buy stuff, you could do e-commerce off the internet, but you could get information about museums and so forth on the internet, but you couldn't interact with other people on the internet. And believe it or not, there was a time before that. And so the ways to create interactions with people, in other words, social media, really became a thing that you had to build. And I think what happened since then is that as this technology develops, you realize that there are new problems and new opportunities that are really exciting to solve. And that really never stops. And then also, there are new tools that offer the potential for kind of new solutions. The most recent wave being AI, offering tremendous amounts of opportunities to solve problems that couldn't be solved before, or even solving problems in new ways. And that's just tremendously exciting and keeps me going in terms of finding new opportunities and new problems to solve.
And one follow-up to that, I know you mentioned toward the beginning of the call that KarmaCheck wasn't directly an idea from when you were at LinkedIn, but built on that, something that's kind of related, the whole digital identity piece. But you didn't go from LinkedIn to KarmaCheck. And so why was this an idea that maybe you had for a while or tied into something that you knew, but you did other things in between?
Yeah, great question. After LinkedIn, I did engage in a couple other companies. I worked on an app to facilitate networking at events. And I even worked on a blockchain project that today is no longer active, but actually was another precursor to KarmaCheck. And what I realized was that in each of these instances, there was this kind of underlying problem around how people are able to connect with each other and how do they establish a basis of trusting each other such that more interesting interactions can occur, whether it's exchanging better information, whether it's buying and selling of services between people, or just having more meaningful interactions, right? Being able to have trust with people you don't know already, such as we're doing all the time now in online interaction, social media, that's really important. And so trying to kind of capture that whole kind of digital identity aspect and getting that better was really something that I was interested in. And we are moving into this really interesting phase now of society where there's a lot going on. We read in the news about deep fakes and fake news, and particularly in this election cycle, we're trying to figure out what information, what news we're hearing is actually true or not. It's really important to know where that information is coming from, who's generating that information, what's the source of that information. Those are some of the things that farther out that hopefully KarmaCheck can become a part of in terms of really providing some more authenticity around where the information of any kind is coming from so that you can trust that information and even trust the people who are generating the information, or maybe even bots that are generating that information for humans to consume.
And you were the founding CTO at LinkedIn, which I think is so interesting because that was like in 2002. And it's been, I guess, is it like 20 years now? I don't know if you've been in a CTO role since, but I imagine that role today would be so different than when you had it like 20 years ago. And so how do you imagine, like if you had to be CTO of LinkedIn today, how different do you think it would be just based on how much technology has changed in the past 20 years?
Yeah, that's right. And being CTO then is certainly very different than now. I mean, the world has changed so much more now with really, all sorts of new technologies that didn't exist 20 years ago. But it's really important if anybody's in a CTO role, for them to really understand what today's technologies are and what they're capable of, and to be able to look in the future to see where the technology is going. And that's really, I think, essential for what becoming a successful CTO really means. And so, yeah, there is a lot of understanding about today as well as the future that a CTO needs to have.
And going off of just how much technology has changed, not only just technology changes, but startups have changed, venture capital has changed. There's a lot of things that have changed in the span of these different companies that you have founded. What's something that you're doing differently with KarmaCheck that maybe you couldn't have done at a past company because it just didn't exist yet, or just like that wasn't the trend in venture? Like, how do you start and work on building these companies now that's different from the first few that you worked on?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've realized that's changed over the last 20 years is that VC has really become a much bigger industry. When I started LinkedIn 20 years ago with other co-founders, the investor industry was really much smaller than it is now. There were just, a few investors really in Silicon Valley, and you almost had to live there for them to be able to come visit you and to engage in conversations with them. What's happened since then in the 20 years is that VC has really become kind of a global phenomenon. There's investors everywhere, and they're interested in so many more things than even before. Yes, a lot of it is still technology based, doing all sorts of different things with technology. But what that means for entrepreneurs is that the opportunity to work on something that really is meaningful for them, is really relevant for them, is more possible. There's just more investors looking at more things. There's even more capital that's available to fund these things. And so in general, it's just an even better time to be an entrepreneur. Getting back to KarmaCheck, for example, we've been very fortunate to find investors that understand our particular product and space and know the opportunities that exist in it. And I think that maybe 20 years ago, it would have been harder to convince fewer investors who have to look at everything, who even understand all the different possibilities for companies to be able to work on those things. So I think it's just a great time to be an entrepreneur founder right now.
And sort of going off of that too, how has your leadership style changed since then? Or like, how did you approach building actual aspects of the company different? Have you found new ways to kind of approach company culture? How has that kind of stuff changed since you were starting these first few companies?
Well, in my own kind of evolution as a leader, as a founder in a company, I've been able to develop my own experience, right? Whereas 20 years ago, obviously, I had much less experience. And so, what I try to do there in terms of being a leader and creating a company culture that hopefully is conducive to the success of the venture, the business, and so forth, is really doing a better job, I would say, at hiring people who are very capable, very experienced in their own right, even to the point where this is something that I really believe is to hire someone who is even more qualified, more experienced than yourself in a certain area. I think that that is really something that is essential that a leader needs to do. When you are able to do that, you can really hand over the reins to them and really lead or manage in a different way. And that makes my job a lot easier, right? So that when I have people around who are very capable, very experienced, they're able to take a lot off my plate, and I'm able to focus on the strategy, the things that I'm interested to do without worrying about everything else that needs to go right in a successful company.
I love asking founders this, and especially I'm going to love asking you this because you've had a few companies. Do you have any favorite mishap stories? Like now that you can look back and laugh on it, but at the time you were like, what is happening? Like, do you have any funny mishap stories from, I guess, the past 4 or 5 companies you've had?
Oh, such a great question. I am embarrassed to share, even any of these, but you put me on the spot, so I have to answer. I think looking back, there was really one instance that over the years, I just remember how surprising it was. And it was really at the beginning of my career when it was just the dawn of the internet. And to be honest, I think one of the oversights that I had was even at the beginning, not realizing how dramatic, how fundamental the internet, believe it or not, the internet was, right? I remember when I was first introduced to the concept of the World Wide Web and seeing web browsers for the first time and seeing the things that it was doing. And what I remember was that the technology was very slow. The pages took a really long time to load, things like that. If you can imagine, there was a time like that. The graphics were really poor and the page layout, they're really sexy today. Beautiful pages, professionally created by designers and tools. But way back when, the tools were very primitive. And I just, remember to myself, oh, this internet technology is going to just have limited utility. And boy, was I wrong, because had I known that, I probably would have jumped in even earlier and maybe done some more things or benefited from it even sooner than I actually did. So it took me about a year to realize how wondrous and how versatile the online world that we live in today was going to be. So I guess the lesson there is like really keep an open mind for opportunities, even ones that apparently don't make sense right now or you don't quite see how it's going to work. But it takes time to develop these things. People work on them and they make them better, and eventually they will be compelling.
I feel like that's kind of how I am with AI. I remember when ChatGPT came out and I was like, oh, this is interesting, but like, we're not going to be talking about this in a year. And now I'm like, okay, maybe we are never going to stop talking about this.
Yeah, so maybe and maybe not. I mean, what's interesting about AI is that there's so many people working on it. There's so much money going into it. And so it seems like good things are inevitably going to happen. Not everything is going to work out, but some really amazing things are going to come out of it. And so I think that goes back to the point about keeping an open mind about what can come from all this work that people are working on.
And I know you mentioned a little bit earlier that once you've started a company, starting new companies becomes kind of addictive. But I'm definitely curious, when you were growing up and stuff, did you imagine you would become this serial founder? You had launched all these different companies. Of course, multiple of them have gone on to be very successful. Did you ever anticipate this is kind of where your life would end up?
Well, I was sort of lucky in the sense that from a very early age, I did have this idea or conviction about being an entrepreneur, being a founder. Even my dad was an entrepreneur. He had started his own company in the civil engineering construction business, and it became very successful. And I just remember kind of growing up, seeing what my dad was doing definitely gave me the idea. But I also grew up in Silicon Valley, which part and parcel, you can't walk half a block without bumping into somebody who's,
Right.
creating their own idea and wanting to start a company. So it was very much in the ethos of where I was growing up, and really just kind of seeing that as something that people would naturally think about and want to do. And so it was a very natural path for me to want to do that. So that's really in comparison to people who grow up in other places where they don't have the opportunity to be as entrepreneurial, and a more traditional kind of career path is what they expect.
I'm always curious. I feel like I've yet to meet someone who grew up in Silicon Valley who like did not end up working in startups and tech or become a founder themselves. I bet those people exist, but I have yet to find them.
You've got to give it a try, right? There's not much lost in trying it out.
I think something else I wanted to ask you about, we talked about this a little bit when we talked about the changes in venture capital over the last couple of decades, but you've also been through a few different market cycles too. And I'm definitely curious, with having that kind of knowledge, did that play any role in sort of how you set up KarmaCheck? And did you sort of take any learnings from like the 2008 crisis, the dot-com boom? Like, did any of those things kind of impact how you guys actually set up the business?
Certainly. I've been, I suppose, fortunate to have seen a few of these cycles where certain things get hyped up over the years. And there is definitely a layering of kind of this classic Gartner hype cycle over it, where at one point there's just an incredible amount of like interest around something, followed by usually disillusionment, and on it goes. To recognize that there are times, and we're in one right now with AI, where certain things just become very interesting to a lot of people. I think that what that impressed upon me is that it is fine to go and, let's say, participate in the hype cycle and to create a company that is hot at the time. Indeed, there's a lot of AI companies that are getting funded, these days. I was just reading an article this morning that said that VCs are, predominantly funding AI startups, or most of the capital is going to that. And it is great to be within trend. The drawback of that is that, you are competing with lots of other people who are trying to do similar things. And so you have to break out of that noise and be very successful, I would say, in spite of that. But I think at the end of the day, what's important is to just, whatever you work on, to just fundamentally have hopefully a sound business idea that at the end of the day generates revenues and more importantly than that is solving customers' problems and really solving a pain point, with hopefully the revenues being an indication of that. And so as long as you have that, whether it's something that is in the hype or something that is not in the hype, that's going to sustain and create these long-lasting, successful businesses at the end of the day. So that's what I've tried to focus on.
And I think we're almost at time, but I had a quick question before we do wrap the interview. Since I'm like obsessed with the fact that you've had so many companies, and now I just have to know, has there been an idea, or like you had an idea, but you couldn't turn it into a company, or like something happened where you're like, oh, I can't get it across the line? Like, is there like an idea you just couldn't get over the line?
Oh, yeah. I think entrepreneurs experience both successes and failures. And it's obviously the successes that get highlighted, but I think in between there's like plenty of things that didn't work. And it's just part of the journey of being an entrepreneur. And so, you hopefully learn from those experiences that are failures, maybe even more so than the ones that are successes. But yeah, I think there are plenty of situations where sometimes the ideas that you have and the tools that you're bringing to solve those ideas are maybe just a little bit ahead of its time. That's actually a common affliction of entrepreneurs. They can see the future, and bringing the rest of the world, often kicking and streaming to the future, is sometimes too hard. So one example for me of that is just a few years ago when I was really interested and excited about the possibilities around blockchain and so forth. And I would say that technology, we really did try to work with it, but it was just still developing. It's still a bit early. Not that I don't believe in it, but it still needs some time to mature as a technology, as tools. And so I'm certainly looking forward to and hoping for the day when it gets there enough and we can really leverage even more of the benefits that come from that blockchain technology.
Do you ever think we'll be able to confirm people's backgrounds and identities through the blockchain?
That's certainly one of the ideas, isn't it? And so we certainly had that idea at KarmaCheck. It has crossed our minds, but it's just very early to really rely on that. And so we've been using more traditional technologies to accomplish what we need to do for our customers. But yeah, hopefully someday we'll be able to get back to that.
Well, we'll be keeping an eye out. But no, thanks so much for coming on the show, Eric. This has been fun.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And that was our conversation with Eric. Dom, what was the lie?
The lie was that Eric saw the potential of the internet as he was working on early web browsers. He did not see the potential. He was, I don't want to say he was late to the internet, but he didn't see it. He didn't get it.
No, that's so funny to hear from someone like him too, because then like a year later, he goes on to help found LinkedIn, which has obviously been like a huge piece of, maybe not for everyone, but for those of us who work on like
those of us with jobs.
No, hey, some jobs you don't need to use LinkedIn. Those of us who are like tied to any piece of tech innovation ever do our job. LinkedIn is such a big deal.
I know, but it's massive.
It'd be like hearing Sam Altman be like, I don't think AI is legit. And then like starting OpenAI. It is so funny to hear that. But if you don't know, like you don't know. I've definitely been wrong about things before.
It's always interesting to hear about how things used to be. Like even for his company, KarmaCheck, yeah, it makes sense. Like background checks were manual. It was like, yeah, of course, you had to ask me, and then I guess you would make phone calls.
Yeah, because I guess the background check process, maybe because it's like I'm someone who literally nothing would come up unless it's like I have some parking ticket I don't know about or something like that I've like never thought about it too deeply. But of course, like if you have court records and stuff like that, like those all live in physical filing cabinets in actual buildings. I remember I talked to an AI company last year that was bringing stuff like that online. And they were saying a big part of their business, like half their business, was still people. And because he's like, oh yeah, we'll get requests sometimes for stuff we don't have online yet. And he's like, and we pay someone to go and find it and answer that person's question and then upload that online. There's so much stuff to go through to get that stuff online that they're like, well, we have a strategy, but also do this piecemeal, like bring stuff online as people ask for it. But yeah, I guess it had just never occurred to me because I've never been worried about the process.
Imagine how much information is just like, not lost, but just not thought about because it's still analog. I remember my first background check. I had to do a background check for an internship. I was like, oh, I guess tell me if you find anything. I was like, I don't know. I'm like 18. Like, I don't know what you could find. But hey, you never know. Maybe I don't know. I don't know what I did. I don't know. But I actually really like the company in terms of like digitizing all of these things. I like that he was honest about the dream of maybe having one background check for everything might be a little bit more difficult. but it still sounds like something that would be really, really efficient.
Yeah, especially because it ties into like the digital identity piece that he said he's been thinking about since he was at LinkedIn, which makes total sense. It's crazy to think that he was thinking about that 20 years ago, because even thinking about today, like I wasn't really thinking about verifying digital identity very much, probably until like the misinformation of the 2016 election. And then I was like, oh yeah, all these people are like not only not representing themselves authentically online, like they're doing so in a way to actually harm other people and like do this kind of propaganda and sway people's minds about things that they're not even actually saying because they don't actually exist.
Yeah.
So it's like really interesting to think about KarmaCheck working on this problem or working toward being able to eventually kind of solve this problem and how long he's been thinking about it. I mean, he may not have thought the internet was going to take off, but he was definitely ahead of his time when it came to digital identity.
He knew something was up. Yeah, I just want to say that everyone at TechCrunch has had a fake Twitter made of them but me, and I'm really left out. I was going to like make myself a fake Twitter. I was like, and then report it in the water cooler chat. Like, who's this? And one thing that was really fun about him is I love people who are just entrepreneurs. Like, he knows that he's addicted to everything.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, we've been covering this space for years, but it's like, it's so crazy when you think of having an idea and being like, okay, cool. I have so much conviction in this idea that I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to have this thing that impacts my family, impacts my finances, could potentially impact the rest of my life. But I have such conviction on this idea. And I just like, a few days ago, I took an ice cube tray out of the freezer and I had a glass and a plate on the table and I found myself putting the ice cubes on the plate. I'm like, I don't know if I'd ever have that much conviction in my own brain, but to hear people who just do it time and time again, it's just always so interesting to me.
I know. It's like, I was with a founder and, she has this beauty company. And I remember thinking, I was like, if I quit my job today and I wanted to start like a lotion company, who do I call? Like, how do you even start 5 businesses? Like,
I know.
I don't even know how you do that. How do you make an idea just come to life? It's always so impressive. It's amazing.
I know. And thinking about his career, it was fun to be able to kind of like chat with him about both how like ventures changed since he first started launching companies and how like his mindset toward the industry has changed and things like that. Because it is crazy to think about not only doing that multiple times, but like launching KarmaCheck was launching into a 1,000% different environment for both VC money and startups than when they were launching LinkedIn.
I know. Imagine pitching KarmaCheck back in the day. And maybe I would have liked the idea, but I don't know. Investors are always weird.
Right. About everything.
Everything. Background check for investors. Founders would like that.
Founders would like that. Rate my investor.
Yep, rate my investor. Yes. Okay, startup idea. So we might start something.
Maybe we will. Found is hosted by myself, TechCrunch senior reporter Becca Skutak, alongside senior reporter Dominic Midori-Davis. Found is produced by Maggie Stamets with editing by Kel. Our illustrator is Bryce Durbin. Found's audience development and social media is managed by Morgan Little, Alyssa Stringer, and Natalie Kreisman. TechCrunch's audio products are managed by Henry Pickavid. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.